Welcome to the Eskrima podcast. My name is Jason Enai, and I'm an Anayan Eskrimador. So, over the last week, I've been dealing with some technical issues with this particular project, as well as my website and everything else, and just kind of brought to the fore the idea that you have to keep pushing through your challenges to find ways through it. We do this in martial arts all the time, and hopefully it transfers over to your daily life, right? I look at the process of lock and block or reflex drills, right? It's a given, all giving and all taking, right? So you have one person who's supposed to receive and another person who's supposed to give, often referred to as a feeder. And we could look at it a bunch of different ways. If we think about it from the point of view of like we're developing fighting, we're developing reflexes, capability, right? As the attacker, we understand that we're developing our attack, the feeder. We should also understand that we're not always exclusively going towards what we could do at our maximum. Because as the feeder, our job is to bring the other person up, the receiver, in terms of their full capacity at whatever skill level they're at, right? We're not there to overwhelm them because we're not actually fighting. And we can't walk away thinking that we're good at fighting when we feed lock and block, nor can we walk away thinking that we're necessarily good at fighting when we receive lock and block, even if the person who's attacking us or feeding us isn't able to penetrate our defense, right? The whole point is it's a process of development, right? And that process of development on either side requires some throttling. Now, there's a number of benefits as far as this particular methodology is concerned. From the feeder's point of view, you get to learn how your attacks will affect the average or even above average opponent when you're striking and they're stepping a certain way, or they're using certain defenses, or a combination of strikes results in a very likely form of defense. That's very useful, right? Because we begin to notice how we can put input into the experience and get a predictable result, right? Now, the other side of that as the attacker is we learn, initially, I think most instructors, which is usually the old tradition, is instructors are the only ones that feed. We no longer have that tradition because that actually retards the growth of the student because they never learn they're attacking. But we walk away from this if we're not careful, thinking that the way to hit someone or to overcome someone's defense is to go harder or go faster, and that's true a lot of the time. Not very useful, however, simply because I can't always be faster than my opponent, and I can't always be able to hit harder or be stronger than my opponent. So if I have an over-reliance, and that's the same thing on the defending side. Defenders might feel like, oh yeah, I'm getting better because I can defend faster than they can hit, or I can block harder than they can hit. Maybe not. Right? Depends on the attacker, right? So the interesting thing on the feeder side, the attacker side, aside from developing your attack, noticing where the weaknesses are, finding out that certain sequences create predictable results, is how I can utilize timing and subtle shifts in angle to create new opportunities. How I can discover certain approaches of the same angle of attack at different timings will create different results, regardless or without a lot of regard to how the defender is going to defend. It's my ability to do that. And then from the defender side, learning how your position and your defenses dictate what you can do next. They are a predeterminant of what type of defense you have to use against each given line from position to position. Because each guard or each position, while it creates an ideal way to defend on certain lines, it creates openings on others. And you begin to discover that if you're very clever, you can produce, or at least display, certain openings in a consistent way as to predict how your feeder is going to attack you if they're looking for openings. And if you can prepare those openings, those apparent chinks in your armor, if you will, you can prepare a counter offensive, or rather a counter tactic, right? And it's this process on both the feeder side and the defender side that creates an opportunity to play chess, right? To really think 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 moves ahead, right? That opportunity comes from being able to practice with the same feeder and different feeders, and see if your responses, whether giving as a feeder or receiving as a defender, how they work out. And then the next stage would be, as you get to a point of diminishing returns, which all drills have a point of diminishing return, right? We begin to add new variables. If you as the feeder are connecting with every blow, or nearly every blow, you're not going to really learn anything. And neither is the receiver, the defender. If the defender is able to block every blow, the defender is not going to learn anything more from that drill. And neither is the feeder really, because they're just running into everything is defensible, right? So it's the adding of a new variable. The variable could be speed or power. The variable could be a new line of attack, right? So maybe you're only striking with the limited lines, or maybe you're striking limited lines with one tool and not the other, right? So giving new stimulus, changing the variables is what gives you the opportunity to grow from that experience, right? And it's the challenges that it puts you up in front of you. You have to keep pushing through, and that metaphorical lesson applies to everyday life, like I've been receiving recently this month, of constant difficulties between the website and this project for the podcast, as well as some other things, all at the same time. And just trying to produce one more episode, do one more class, make one more tweak on the website is part of that whole thing. Finding a new way to get past it, stepping back and collecting yourself and doing it again and again and again. What happens from that process in Lock and Block is we eventually develop, at least under the auspices of that drill, irresistible attacks and impregnable defense, right? Defenses, or the ability to defend in such a way that if you're allowed to go at that pace and you're allowed to utilize those tactics, your opponent's never going to be able to penetrate your attack. And in the same sense, if you develop those attacks in a certain way and you're allowed to use them, meaning you're allowing yourself to use them in that way, the defender wouldn't be able to resist your attacks, right? So, it's that process of challenge and then changing the variables that continue to increase that challenge. So as we get through our points of diminishing returns, it's as if we are on a new curve, right? So, like, as an example, for the most part with my students, unless they're going to become more dedicated, intermediate, and put more time in, statistically speaking, martial arts students don't really train very long, right? Like, most of them quit for whatever reason, which is why with my programs I don't really have like a throttle back Like I'm going to hold you back until you're good enough kind of teaching methodology, which a lot of instructors do. Not all. A lot of people rush their students through to get to that black belt or whatever it is. It's a problem with selling a destination. Once they reach that destination, they quit. That's one of the reasons why they quit, right? However, most people, their bottleneck is their life. Work, school, relationships, have a baby, loved one lost, etc. All very good reasons. Sometimes there's no reason at all, but they're the ones that prevent themselves from being great, right? Because everyone's great. Every person, like from the pro fighter that you might have training in your gym, right, to the timid person, child, youth who's not quite sure about things. Every one of us have that potential to be great. It's whether we let ourselves be great. And so the curriculum and the instructor doesn't need to be the bottleneck in all of that. Most people just prevent themselves from being great. That's just the way that is. Maybe it's fair to say being great at martial arts, being great at what martial arts has to offer you and teach you. Not everybody is going to drink from that cup, and that's okay, right? But if they were to, right, as they go through the training, I limit the lines of attack, angles 1 through 5. First, that's what Great Grandmaster Cabalist did, and my dad did, of course, right? So I follow the student tradition, but there's also another reason. I find that, at least for me, the reason why I do that, other than the tradition, which is how I did it before, but now there's a logic behind it, is as I study and have studied and participated in real-world applications, right, from my own life experience as well as the study of others, whether anecdotally or through video or whatever, most people only get struck with angle 1 and 5 and 3, just like my dad always said, right? So, sure, I could teach them how to defend a jab cross, but like, you never see it. You never see that attack in security video, at least to the point that the statistically how often that occurs is so insignificant that we wonder why we would spend so much time on it. I know why, but as far as self-defense is concerned, unless you're learning how to deliver a sophisticated attack as simplistic as a jab cross, you're not learning how to defend against it, because that's not what's going to be the likely attack. So we work on a limited angle set, right? And this focuses us and makes our people, ourselves, more capable sooner under the most likely kind of altercation, right? That'll allow us to overcome challenges sooner, right? The bottleneck doesn't have to be in the curriculum. You don't have to require someone to learn how to, sprawl against a double a shot or a wrestling shot for a double leg takedown as like a fundamental, unless that's all you're doing. If you're teaching self-defense, yeah, that attack almost never happens, right? Doesn't happen in a bar often, so on and so forth. It does happen. I did say almost never, right? But statistically, what you need to prepare for is an overhand right with a bottle in it, in the hand, or something, just in case. Because while sophisticated attacks are not significant statistically, the use of what's called body weapons in terms of FBI statistics for assaults and violence, right? This is what they include hands and fists in that statistics, but the statistics also reveal that there's a significant number of assaults that occur with a tool in hand, right? Which is where lock and block again becomes particularly salient, or relevant, right? Because you're learning how to deal with someone that's striking you with a tool, right? Sure, it's a stick. Most people are like, oh, that never happens. But then they see the meme video, something come out, some guy getting hit with a stick, whether it's a 2x4 or a bat, that's a stick, right? So it's significant enough for us to want to defend against the tool. Still needs to be an overhand right. It's probably more likely going to be a screwdriver or a bottle, but overhand right. However, moving forward with the value of lock and block is that it develops us beyond that low threshold, very, very low threshold, right, of someone who's willing to attack you, not particularly sophisticated or skilled, but maybe very experienced because of their willingness to commit violence or participate in violence. And that's a challenge. And the martial arts is about you overcoming challenge. Most of my students, that challenge won't be physical. It'll be psychological, it'll be emotional, right? And so it behoves us in our training to produce experiences that are both very physical, but also very mental, very emotional, right? To deal with the emotions of failure, to deal with the feeling of aggression, to deal with the psychological problem of I just can't do it, can't seem to get through this. That's the valuable experience. If you're blocking everything as a student, right, you don't experience any emotional turmoil, right, or even intellectual turmoil, psychological turmoil, right, and that's a part of that process that made, the mystique of martial arts, is largely gone with kids, unless they're watching their whatever, I don't know, what is spin blades or turbo whatever. Ninja Turtles is my age, right? But that mystique in terms of what I grew up with like Bruce Lee being on the screen and what was it? All of the other like legendary martial arts movies. Even today we have these, right? But they're not made for children. They're made for my age, right? Because we still maybe, hopefully, believe or wish it was true that you could do all those things, right? The martial arts, that mystique comes from going through all those challenges. Lock and Block is a great part of that, right? That reflex as a template and a model for how we could produce that ability of resilience in an individual. It's a fantastic way to do that, provided that tool is in the right hands, right? Like, not everybody does that. I have colleagues that I grew up with under my father that, there was a sense of pride if you got your fingers smashed, right? That's an indicator of a mistake, not success, right? If, as a feeder, I'm feeding you hard and fast, which we do, and I'm getting my hands banged up, something's wrong, right? Like I've struck too deep, or maybe my opponent is reaching, or partner, the person that I'm feeding, is reaching in too deep. Something's wrong. Because if we go back to the bolo, which is originally what the Filipino martial arts is, it's a bladed art. If we go back to the bolo, I'm losing fingers. They're losing fingers. And while that's fine in training for us to do that, if we're using that as a measure of pride, right? I did this so hard and rough, and now I'm all banged up and I can't train for a week, or I can train for a week, but it's going to be limited. This is not an indicator of success, right? Indicator of success is, wow, I can't believe you guys didn't get hurt, or it didn't even look like a pattern. The feeder's just hitting you as hard and as fast and very complicated, and I saw the fakes and I did all this stuff, and I saw you having to, like, as a defender, be so compact and quick and efficient and able to defend yourself, and I saw he got a couple in, but you blocked almost everything. That's amazing. How did you do that? Not like, okay, I just did a hard session and I can barely open or close my hand, right? Clearly there's something wrong, right? So we have to be honest with ourselves with that, because there's some pride in going hard and fast. I get that part, right? But we have to think about it from the point of view of, like, what happens if that was really a fight as opposed to a friendly training session, right? I personally have fought maybe less than 5 times, maybe 3, maybe 4 times, full contact with no safety gear. And 2 of the times my father saw me, I was, I think I might have been 25 or younger. And but we just fought. No helmet, no gloves. And I loved it. It was great. I don't recommend that you do it, because responsibly I shouldn't recommend you to do it. But it was a great learning experience. Fantastic learning experience. And had I taken pride in blocking or developed the idea that if I strike really hard on my opponent and he blocks and I get my hand smashed, that's a good thing, not a very good escrimador, right? Because those old stories of Greek Grandmaster Villabreau fighting in Hawaii, no holds barred, with a stick, I don't think I want to come out of that experience with any kind of injury if I can prevent it. I'm not saying that I'm anywhere near the skill set of Grandmaster Villabreau, although that's part of my lineage, right? I would want to come out of that fight as unscathed as possible. And the only way I'm going to have done that is through going through a lot of different challenges. Now, you could just fight. That'll work. It's not structured. You're not guaranteed to get a full spectrum of kinds of attacks or elicitation of the right kinds of defenses, right? If you're very good right at the beginning, you'll develop a few tricks that work on everyone, because the caliber of the fighters isn't necessarily very high, right? People are willing to fight versus people that are good at fighting. They're not necessarily the same people. There's a lot of people that are willing to fight. Not all of them are good or even mediocre for that matter, right? Certainly not all of them are great. Otherwise, we'd have more stories of great escrimadors. So, you certainly could just fight to produce the results that Lock and Block does, but it's not structured, right? And educationally speaking, the experience should be structured. And the person who's the feeder or the instructor who's directing, feeding, and receiving should be knowledgeable enough to be able to direct that experience in a way of saying, okay, Lisa, you have a hard time with your foot replacement, so Tommy, when you feed Lisa, make sure that you feed in such a way that makes Lisa have to switch her feet. Or, all right, John, I want you to hit Mike, right? But he's really bad at defending against this particular line, so don't do it every time. But I want you to pepper in a lot more of that line of attack, so that he can defend and practice that, right? There needs to be direction and structure, right? And as you get to the point where you as the defender are beginning to experience success with a particular set of stimuli, you change the stimuli, right? That was my dad's way. Like if you ran into a difficulty with a combo, he'd keep feeding you the combo. He'd give you 3-4 chances before he would change. If you didn't get it, he'd remember and give it to you the next day. But he would always give you a number of times to attempt success over a particular set of challenges before he changed the challenges, right? And it's that structured process that not only results in resilience physically, but also mentally and certainly emotionally. And that's the benefit of that kind of training, right? Challenges. And so I'm getting lots of Lock and Block lately when it comes to getting things done, when it comes to making my website and my podcast stuff work correctly so I can produce more value. My objective is to make available as much of what I have to offer, right? And the passion that I have to share with my students and new students that come in. And it isn't always an easy road, especially when you're doing most of it on your own, right? I have lots of help in terms of other things, but like when it comes down to it, it's the content that I produce, and I largely produce that on my own, right? So keep going through your challenges. When you get that angle, right, and it's a challenging angle, get it again. Get it again until you win. Get it again until you mentally get past that thing. You come to a challenge, you go over it, you go under it, you go around it, or you go through it. That's that intrepid spirit that martial arts is supposed to invoke in everyone that practices martial arts, certainly in the United System of Eskrima, right? It was always a great accolade if my father would call the students a student, any student, Escrimador, right? And if you said, oh, you're an Escrimador, or if you put it in writing, that was like this big thing. Not because he's acknowledging you, not because he's validating you, but because he's standing witness to your own climb to greatness, right? Something you do for yourself. We can give you the curriculum and we can give you the experiences. We can produce different instances of opportunity, but you have to do the work. Right? No one can take that away from you. Anyways, that's this version of the Eskrima podcast. I'm going to put it up right away. I have to connect a couple of the videos because I have to take breaks in between because I have allergies, so I was sneezing. But that's the podcast for today, and I can't wait to see you on the training floor.